Hey, it's Rob Ford. Welcome to the first episode of the Plain Talk podcast. And boy, am I excited about this. I am a big podcast fan. I listen to a ton of podcasts every day, all sorts of different ones. I listen to true crime podcasts. I listen to news podcasts. I listen to storytelling podcasts. I love the medium. When I got into this business, I started as a blogger. I've always been a digital guy. I've done talk radio. I write for print. I do a lot of stuff. But my heart's in digital, and I love doing digital, working in digital platforms. Doing a strict podcast, though, other than I dabbled in it a little bit years and years ago when the medium was still very new. This is a new thing for me. This is a new thing that I'm trying out. I'm not doing it, so I'm going to be learning as I go, and you're going to be listening as I'm learning, and hopefully I won't drive you absolutely insane with how I'm doing this. But as we go, the way I'm doing things now, we may mix things up, but for now, I think I've worked out how I want this show to go, and what I want this to focus on is interviews with newsmakers, because I think that's what I can deliver for you folks in the audience. I think what I can give you is the opportunity to listen to newsmakers as I ask them questions, and hopefully as time goes on, we'll get some interactive aspects to this show going, and you can participate as well. But for now, it's about getting newsmakers on and having them talk about the topical things and hopefully say some revealing things. I think it's going to be a lot of fun. My first guest for the first episode is Governor Doug Burgum. Recorded the interview with him just a little bit ago. It went well. Obviously, this is his first first legislative session. This is obviously the second legislative session of his term, but it is the first time, I think, where he's coming in as a full governor. The 2017 session coming just a couple of months after his 2016 election victory. That was tough. He had it's a weird sort of anachronism. I don't want to call it an anachronism, but a weird sort of feature, I don't know, of North Dakota's election cycle, that our legislative session starts almost immediately after the election. We have the election, we have the holidays, and then we go right into the legislative session. And so all these newly elected lawmakers, and last in 2017, our newly elected governor, they're coming in, and they didn't really have a lot of time to get up to speed on things. And the governor especially, he's got an entire executive branch to run. He's got people to hire. Really the budget that first session, while I think the governor would probably argue that it was his budget, let's face it, a lot of the budget work was done by the Dalrymple administration before him. So suffice it to say, the point I'm trying to make is that this session is really the first session where he gets an opportunity to put his stamp on something. And that's what he's doing. And so I wanted to get him on this show to talk about that. We ran down some things. We talked about the budget. We talked about sort of the frosty relationship. I think I saw that described in a headline. I'm forgetting who wrote the article, but I saw that described in one of the headlines recently. A frosty relationship between himself and some of the legislatures. I asked him about that. He had some interesting things to say. I asked him about the controversy around his salary. The governor wants to decline it again. He doesn't think it's a big deal. He thinks the solution is simple, but I asked him about that. It's interesting, the Teddy Roosevelt Library. I also asked him about a proposal to use legacy fund earnings to eliminate the state income tax over time. He had some interesting comments about that. So all of that's coming up straight ahead in my first ever podcast interview with Governor Doug Burgum. We'll get into that right now. Governor Doug Burgum, it's your second legislative session, legislative session of your term as governor. And my first question is anything different? I know the last time you got elected in 2016, you came into the 2017 legislative session. I don't think it was any big surprise that you got elected, but obviously you weren't governor for that long before the session. That's not a lot of time to put a team together. That's not a lot of time to put a budget together. My feeling and the feeling of a lot of people is this is really the first session where you're going to put your stamp on it. Is that how you feel as well? Does this session feel different to you?
Well, Rob, first of all, honored to be on your very first podcast. So thanks for inviting me on. And yes, it does feel completely different. As you remember, 2 years ago in December of 16, when we took office, middle of December, we had 8,000 protesters at the Dakota Access Pipeline protests, and the world was scrutinizing the state of North Dakota as part of that process. we had what turned out to be a $1.7 billion reduction that we had to take in the general fund. And then just as a parent, we all have challenges. I've got 3 kids. I had a senior in high school that was finishing up his senior year back in Fargo. And so I was not quite an empty nester and trying to stay engaged, back with a high schooler in Fargo. So there were a lot of things personally, professionally, pulling in a lot of different directions. Here, coming into this session, we've had lots of time to prepare. We had an opportunity to do the 57 different strategic reviews last year to really understand what's going on across all the agencies and state government. We had a chance to be very thoughtful and in-depth in terms of how we pulled together our budget recommendation, accompanying policy. And this week's been a blast. The legislature's in town, and myself and my team, we've actually been able to be here, be present, have lots of meetings with legislators, and really engage in that process. So it feels very different. We're excited. And of course, financially, we're in a different spot than we were 2 years ago. And that makes it fun as well.
From the outside looking in, it could seem like things have been a little bit icy. During your budget address at the end of last month, you came down. There was some delay in even getting you up to the rostrum to speak in the first place. There were some last minute rule changes in terms of including your executive budget proposals as bills. The legislature passing a new rule sort of last minute saying we're not going to, those bills aren't going to be official bills anymore. They're just going to be sort of documents that are included as advisement. Flash forward to the beginning of this session, and we just this week had a meeting where, talking about the forecast. Those have been such a problem in the past, where during the oil boom, we were overestimating revenues. After the oil boom, when commodity prices were falling, we couldn't seem to find the floor of how low, we kept overestimating revenues, and it got really bad. The executive branch, of course, had their, had their recommendation. The legislature, again, diverged from that. So from the outside looking in, it could see like things are maybe a little bit frosty between the executive branch and the legislative branch. Can you talk about that for me?
Yeah, I absolutely can. And I think it's, you got to remember that we've got 141 members in the legislature. And I'd say the frost advisory does not extend over the entire body. So yeah, there's some folks that enjoy the tug and the pull of, who's got the power, the legislative branch versus the executive branch. And then there's other legislators down there that are more focused like we are, which, we've been elected to do a job and serve the people of North Dakota, and we should collectively work together to deliver the best solutions we can for the taxpayers. And you mentioned the budget address back in December, thousands of hours into the budget address and the accompanying proposals that went along with those from all the agency heads and their teams, the budget analysts, and the work that went into that. And, we put in enormous effort on the executive branch side to deliver the very best starting point that we can, because we respect that the legislators are the group that does the appropriation. But as it has been as far back as anyone can remember, possibly since the beginning of statehood, certainly you got an attorney general that's got a 40-year look back and a Supreme Court justice who's got a 60-year look back. Neither of them can remember a time where the governor's budget was not invested with introduced as actually a bill as a starting point for legislative deliberations. And so what was described as a housekeeping change is a significant historic change where the governor's and the executive branch budgets are not the starting point for the deliberations. So we'll see how that goes. But again, that wasn't the entire body. That was a few folks that wanted to have more legislative control over the starting point. And again, I don't know if that is best serves. I certainly don't think that best serves the people of North Dakota. It's not about us versus them. It's about how do we create the very best starting point. But then, going through to the state of the state, I would say, I felt a very warm reception when we were there for the state of the state. And certainly the legislators seemed to be very gracious and supportive and grateful for the efforts of the First Lady. And, we're, Lieutenant Governor Brent Sanford, the First Lady, myself, we're excited and we're honored to serve and excited to be having the opportunity to try to move policy forward here in the for the state of North Dakota. But on the legislature having their own revenue forecast, this is something that started 2 years ago. And it's not a best practice to have two different competing forecasts and then try to split the difference. I mean, I think a best practice would, let's really take a look at the assumptions that go into the forecast to make sure we're doing the very best job we can, whether it's, statistically or using predictive analytics, or whether it's actually just talking to people in agriculture, in energy, in retail, in healthcare, to understand what are the drivers that you have that are driving what might become our energy. And I think that, we put together a very thoughtful and conservative revenue forecast that we put forward. The lawmakers are using taxpayer dollars to come up with a separate one. And in the end, it appears that they just picked their own numbers for what they thought the completed wells should, and some of those underlying assumptions, drive revenue. So now we're starting, I guess we were 140 million apart. They split the difference yesterday or the day before. So I think the two forecasts are 70 million apart. And we just go forward there. But again, I think it would be better use of taxpayer dollars for us collectively to work together with the legislature, as the state did for many, many years, to come up with the one really terrific forecast, if you can, versus having two competing ones.
Talking about that point about using the wise use of taxpayer dollars, your budget doesn't include a salary for yourself again, and I know this was an issue during the 2017 session. This goes back to a 2016 campaign promise you made. Jack Dura from the Bismarck Tribune, reporter, he had a quote from Senator Tim Mathern, Democrat from Fargo, saying essentially, why are we spending more intellectual time on this? Why are we? I think he said intellectual energy or something like that. Why is this such an issue? I mean, why is this so important to you? Why not just donate your salary?
Well, I think that we have to look at the context of, at the time when I was running, we were talking about making some very difficult and challenging cuts. We've already talked about. I mean, no legislature, had ever had to deliver. No executive branch, collectively ever, deliver to the citizens and to the agencies and say, we got to take $1.7 billion out of a $6 billion budget. From the private sector, going back to my earliest days in the startup as an entrepreneur, when we hit hard times, instead of, laying off people or cutting everybody else's salary, I always learned that the leader should be the first one. If you're going to ask people to take a cut, I thought the place to start was cutting my own salary. And that's where that came from. It wasn't a political gimmick. It was something that was heartfelt on my part, that I felt that I couldn't ask others. I mean, we were asking state employees to go without a salary. And so I said, well, I'm going to, go without it. We were asking them to go without salary increase. So I said, I'll go without a salary. As far as it becoming difficult, challenging, for the legislature, yeah, there were some people that wanted to make a political point out of it. And so they made it difficult. I mean, if you and I were in a room, I think we could figure out in a nanosecond, how you could, include the dollars in the budget so it's there in case the lieutenant governor would need to replace me if something catastrophic happened. Just put it in there at the end of the session. I'll turn it back to the general fund. I mean, it's just that simple to be able to, to do that. And yesterday, the governor's budget went through appropriations. No one asked a question. It sailed right through. And I think everybody understands that it's a really simple thing, and legislature doesn't need to make a big deal out of it. We can focus on things that are important to the public.
Speaking of yesterday, you testified before a legislative committee for the first time, and this was concerning, I think, specifically the Teddy Roosevelt Library. You want to use some legacy fund earnings for the library. How'd that go? I mean, how was that experience for you?
Well, it was an honor to have an opportunity to testify, and I think on this particular thing, the Theodore Roosevelt Presidential Library and Museum, the reason why I took the step to be able to be there to testify is because I think we're in a unique position from the governor's office, where we've had probably the most contact with the Department of Interior going back to when Secretary Zinke was here. During his time as the secretary, and of course the National Park Service reports up to Secretary of Interior. We knew how strongly he felt about having the library built in North Dakota. Our office works with the federal partners, and certainly our federal delegation is going to have an opportunity to play a role in this thing, and making sure that we've got support from the Park Service, because this isn't just a library building. This is an opportunity for the Theodore Roosevelt National Park to get funding ahead of the other 60 parks in the country. It's an opportunity for us to end up with a new visitor center that's embedded in the library. It's a chance for us to get sort of our 1960s cinder block rest stop that the national park has at Painted Canyon, which is it's a location. It's the spot that more people visit in North Dakota than any other place. Over 700,000 people stop at that Painted Canyon rest stop, and the thing looks like the elementary school I went to in Arthur. It's a cinder block building, and it's not even heated. It's not even open in the wintertime. And so we have a chance to put a better face on for North Dakota for our visitors. And so with the federal interaction with national parks and also interacting with national donors, one of the things that the state has done successfully in the past is done match grants where the state puts up money, whether it's from the Heritage Center in Bismarck or other projects, or whether it's challenge grants for the universities. So the legislature's done this. So we're basically modeling a practice they've done in the past, and by having a 2-for-1 match, $2 of private capital, $100 million coming into Western North Dakota to help diversify the economy, with $50 million matched from the legacy fund earnings. It seems like a safe bet, an easy bet, smart bet for the legislature to make, to put up those dollars and see if the capital shows up. And I also wanted to present a sense of urgency by testifying, because we know that there's only 14 states that have designated presidential libraries. We would be on that sort of list of must-see destinations if we got it. But we also know that Theodore Roosevelt's so popular, and virtually every state can make a claim to him one way or the other, that other people would say, hey, this is maybe we should go after the presidential library. We've got support right now from the Roosevelt family. As part of my testimony yesterday, showed a video from Theodore Roosevelt, the fifth great-great-grandson of TR. Ted Roosevelt, as he goes by, is going to be here on the 22nd. We're going to have some major national donors that are here. National Park Foundation, which is a separate foundation, which is raising hundreds of millions of dollars to support the Park Service. They're interested in this as a lead project. The National Trust for Historic Preservation has indicated their support, Boone and Crockett. So we got a set of national partners that are all looking at North Dakota to go right now to say, hey, does North Dakota really want this? Is North Dakota willing to give us the nod that they're committed to help make this thing happen? And so we wanted to send that strong signal, because this is one of the fastest ways I know to get $100 million of outside capital brought in to help us diversify our economy and in the western part of the state, and really have the whole nation look at North Dakota differently because of this project.
You, in your executive, speaking of the Legacy Fund, in your executive budget, it's the Teddy Roosevelt Library and a couple of other proposals using Legacy Fund dollars, and really sort of the first time we've put before the legislature the idea of I guess not the first time we put before the legislature, but really we're starting to get proposals for how to use the Legacy Fund. I wanted to run another proposal that has come up this session by you. State Representative Craig Hedlund, Republican from Montpelier, who is also the chair of the House Finance and Taxation Committee. He has an idea to use Legacy Fund earnings to, over time, eliminate the income tax. What's your thought on that sort of an idea?
Well, I think that it's, when you look at a state for the next 100 years, it's very hard to predict what the drivers will in the economy. And I think that giving future legislators, future governors, future tax commissioners all the tools that we have, preserving those tools is useful, because I think if you've got to have you want to have appropriate sound, but perhaps lower levels of regulation, because a regulation is a form of a tax on the people, a tax on business. So you want to have a regulatory environment that attracts capital and talent, and you want to have an actual tax environment that attracts people and talent. And so some of it is also relative to other states. If every other state had no income tax and we were the only one that had it, that would not be good for attracting, talent or capital. So you have to look in the context of that. So I like making sure that we have the ability to keep on the books, the ability to have different sources of revenue for the state. But I like the idea of working those rates lower when we can. And there's been we've been very successful, because now over the past 4 bienniums, and we're projecting again now that $1 billion of oil tax revenue go in to help defray and support costs for general government in the general fund. And that's $1 billion that didn't exist 10 years ago. And it's one of the reasons why our state's been able to, consecutively have larger budgets than some of our neighbors like South Dakota, even though they have more people. And so, it's tempting to say, hey, we're going to use one form of tax revenue, oil tax revenue, and oil tax revenue goes into the legacy fund and the earnings come off the legacy fund. I still think of that as its original source as being oil tax revenue. If we're going to use oil tax revenue to buy down other forms of taxes like property tax or income tax or corporate income tax, that might work in the short term, probably doesn't work in the long term, because I don't know if you can count on the level of oil tax revenue that we're getting today, 20, 30, 40 years from now. I just don't know, because there's going to be so much innovation. What's going to happen on transportation fuels in the next, 30 or 40 years? You can't say. So that's why with the legacy fund, where this is the first time, last time was the first time it could be used, $200 million were used in the general fund of legacy fund earnings. We don't want to touch legacy fund principal. That's for the future. But I don't agree in using legacy fund earnings to go into the general fund, because that's just like, again, using, oil tax revenue and becoming more dependent on it. But we do have an opportunity right now where we do have a strong energy economy, where we can cover all the costs of the general fund through sales tax and oil taxes, income taxes, which are quite low, corporate taxes, which are quite low. We can cover everything in the general fund as proposed, and we still have the money coming off the legacy fund to do primarily one-time capital projects that actually attract and are leveraged in additional capital. We've got $300 million of legacy fund earnings, but in our proposal, for those to be spent, we would have over $1 billion of leverage coming off it, either through approaches with bonding or approaches with matching funds. And North Dakota has always been capital starved, and so if we can use the legacy fund earnings to attract capital to our economy and help diversify economy, I think it's a fantastic use. And we had a criteria. We said, will a legacy fund project have regional, state, national impact? Can they be leveraged with partnerships to expand their impact? Will the project positively impact the economy and the workforce, and will it have an impact beyond the current generation? And those were the test questions we put up against the projects that we proposed, like the $55 million for a revolving infrastructure fund, like the $25 million for school construction loan. All of these, like the Theodore Roosevelt Presidential Library and Museum, meet the test of those four questions. And so it's an exciting time, and this is a chance for North Dakota to really use the legacy fund to create legacy for the state.
Just a last question. We've gone a little bit over the time, and I appreciate you being so generous with your time today. I just one last question on that front. If I could play devil's advocate for a minute, it wouldn't be like using obviously direct oil and gas taxes and just shifting those straight over to the general fund. We've obviously accumulated a very large principal. I think what Representative Hedlund's proposal would do is take the earnings, not the principal, but the earnings from that principal and use that. So it's not like we're basing it on obviously oil and tax revenues, which are going to go up and down with the commodity markets, but rather that, the earnings from the principal on the legacy fund, which is obviously a much more stable source. Is that making sense?
Yeah, I hear what you're saying, and I think it's interesting. You've spent time in Alaska, and some other people may have a proposal of, hey, let's just not just eliminate income tax, because that only supports people with income. Let's use the legacy fund to write a check to every citizen in the state.
Yeah, I don't want to do that.
And I think that that's people always, whenever there's a pot of money, people have ideas on how to spend it. I'm like the idea of when we've had such a challenge aggregating capital, and when we may have challenges like on infrastructure, why we want to put $55 million of earnings into a revolving loan fund is that if we do that and we do that over time, we're going to end up with a very large revolving infrastructure loan fund. Right now, when we had infrastructure, whether it was with the surge bill a few years ago or with the grants that we give from the Water Commission, when we give someone a grant or a payment or the stuff we were doing before with the property tax buy down, as it was called, where we were just sending checks out to political subdivisions, that was all, that money just goes and it's gone. Where if we can invest in creating these revolving funds, then if we're 20 years down the road and the oil industry is not producing the kind of revenue, we'll have places where local political subdivisions can have access to infrastructure. So we're trying to build, for the long term, not the short term, trying to really create legacies and things that have an impact more than a generation. And that's how we're coming.
Governor, thank you for your time.
Thank you, Rob, and all the best. Hope you have a great career as a podcaster, if that's what they're called. But appreciate being on your initial show. Appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you. Well, that's it for this episode of the Plain Talk podcast. So my goal here in the beginning, and admittedly I may not stick to it as closely as I'd like because, like I said, I'm still learning here. But my goal in the beginning is to try to do 5 new episodes a week. So be sure to subscribe, rate me on iTunes. We're going to have all that stuff out. Follow me at sayanythingblog.com. Of course, that's where you'll be able to get all the latest information. You can follow me on Twitter at Rob Port. You can track me down. I'm on Facebook. sayanythingblog.com is on Facebook. You can check out all those places to follow the podcast. But be sure to subscribe. And like I said, going to be trying to do about 5 of these a week. So stay tuned. We'll keep all the information here. Thanks for listening. We'll talk again.